Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another episode of The Reading Corner with MooseChangerPat.
That's me, in case you're wondering.
Today we are reading Chapter 9 of Magician's Gambit by David Eddings, and as always, you should support the original work by buying the original book. Chapter 9. The storm blew itself out the next morning, but they stayed in the cave for another day after the wind had died down to allow the mare to recover and the newborn colt to gain a bit more strength. Garion found the attention of the little animal disturbing. It seemed that no matter where he went in the cave, those soft eyes followed him, and the colt was continually nuzzling at him. The other horses also watched him with a kind of mute respect. All in all, it was a bit embarrassing. On the morning of their departure, they carefully removed all traces of their stay from the cave. The cleaning was spontaneous, neither the result of some suggestion or any discussion, but rather was something in which they all joined without comment. "The fire's still burning," Durnick fretted, looking back into the glowing dome from the doorway as they prepared to leave. "It'll go out by itself after we leave," Wolf told him. "I don't think you could put it out anyway, no matter how hard you tried." Durnick nodded soberly. "You're probably right," he agreed. "Close the door, Garion," Aunt Paul said after they had led their horses out onto the ledge outside the cave. Somewhat self-consciously, Garion took hold of the edge of the huge iron door and pulled it. Although Beric, with all his great strength, had tried without success to budge the door, it moved easily as soon as Garion's hand touched it. A single tug was enough to set it swinging gently closed. The two solid edges came together with a great hollow boom, leaving only a thin, nearly invisible line where they met. Mr. Wolf put his hand lightly on the pitted iron, his eyes far away. Then he sighed once, turned, and led them back along the ledge the way they had come 2 days before. Once they had rounded the shoulder of the mountain, they remounted and rode on down through the tumbled boulders and patches of rotten ice to first low bushes and stunted trees a few miles below the pass. Although the wind was still brisk, the sky overhead was blue, and only a few fleecy clouds raced by, appearing strangely close. Garion rode up to Mr. Wolf and fell in beside him. His mind was filled with confusion by what had happened in the cave, and he desperately needed to get things straightened out. "Grandfather," he said. "Yes, Garion," the old man answered, rousing himself from his half-doze. "Why did Aunt Paul try to stop me? With the colt, I mean." "Because it was dangerous," the old man replied. "Very dangerous." "Why dangerous?" "When you try to do something that's impossible, you can pour too much energy into it, and if you keep trying, it can be fatal." "Fatal?" Wolf nodded. "You drain yourself out completely, and you don't have enough strength left to keep your own heart beating." "I didn't know that." Garion was shocked. Wolf ducked as he rode under a low branch. "Obviously." "Don't you keep saying that nothing is impossible?" "Within reason, Garion, within reason." They rode on quietly for a few minutes, the sound of their horses' hoofs muffled by the thick moss covering the ground under the trees. "Maybe I'd better find out more about all this," Garion said finally. "That's not a bad idea. What was it you wanted to know?" "Everything, I guess." Mr. Wolf laughed. "That would take a very long time, I'm afraid." Garion's heart sank. "Is it that complicated?" "No, actually it's very simple, but simple things are always the hardest to explain." "That doesn't make any sense," Garion retorted a bit irritably. "Oh?" Wolf looked at him with amusement. "Let me ask you a simple question, then. What's 2 and 2?" "4," Garion replied promptly. "Why?" Garion floundered for a moment. "It just is," he answered lamely. "But why?" "There isn't any why to it. It just is. There's a why to everything, Garion." "All right. Why is 2 and 2 4, then?" "I don't know," Wolf admitted. "I thought maybe you might." They passed a dead snag standing twisted and starkly white against the deep blue sky. "Are we getting anywhere?" Garen asked, even more confused than now. "Actually, I think we've come a very long way," Wolf replied. "Precisely what was it you wanted to know?" Garion put it as directly as he knew how. "What is sorcery?" "I told you that once already. The will and the word." "That doesn't really mean anything, you know." "All right, try it this way. Sorcery is doing things with your mind instead of your hands. Most people don't use it because at first it's much easier to do things the other way. Garion frowned. It doesn't seem hard. That's because the things you've been doing have come out of impulse. You've never sat down and thought your way through something. You just did it. Isn't it easier that way? What I mean is, why not just do it and not think about it? Because spontaneous sorcery is just third-rate magic, completely uncontrolled. Anything can happen if you simply turn the power of your mind loose. It has no morality of its own. The good or the bad of it comes out of you, not out of the sorcery. You mean when I burned Asherak, it was me and not the sorcery? Garion asked, feeling a bit sick at the thought. Mr. Wolf nodded gravely. It might help if you remember that you were also the one who gave life to the cult. The two things sort of balance out. Garion glanced back over his shoulder at the colt, who was frisking along behind him like a puppy. What you're saying is that it can be either good or bad. No, Wolf corrected. By itself, it has nothing to do with good or bad, and it won't help you in any way to make up your mind how to use it. You can do anything you want to with it. Almost anything, that is. You can bite the tops off all the mountains, or stick the trees in the ground upside down, or turn all the clouds green if you feel like it. What you have to decide is whether you should do something, not whether you can do it. You said almost anything, Gary noted quickly. I'm getting to that, Wolf said. He looked thoughtfully at a low-flowing cloud, an ordinary-looking old man in a rusty tunic and gray hood looking at the sky. There's one thing that's absolutely forbidden. You can never destroy anything. Not ever. Garion was baffled by that. I destroyed Asherak, didn't I? No, you killed him. There's a difference. You set fire to him and he burned to death. To destroy something is to try to uncreate it. That's what's forbidden. What would happen if I did try? Your power would turn inward on you and you'd be obliterated in an instant. Garion blinked, and then suddenly went cold at the thought of how close he had come to crossing that forbidden line in his encounter with Asherak. How do I tell the difference? He asked in a hushed voice. I mean, how do I go about explaining that I only meant to kill somebody and not destroy him? It's not a good area for experimentation, Wolf told him. If you really want to kill somebody, stick your sword in him. Hopefully you won't have occasion to do that sort of thing too often. They stopped at a small brook trickling out of some mossy stones to allow their horses to drink. You see, Garion, Wolf explained, the ultimate purpose of the universe is to create things. It won't permit you to come along behind it, uncreating all the things it went to so much trouble to create in the first place. When you kill somebody, all you've done, really, is alter him a bit. You've changed him from being alive to being dead. He's still there. To uncreate him, you have to will him out of existence entirely. When you feel yourself on the verge of telling something to vanish or go away or be not, you're getting very close to the point of self-destruction. That's the main reason we have to keep our emotions under control all the time. I didn't know that, Karen admitted. You do now. Don't even try to unmake a single pebble. A pebble? The universe doesn't make any distinction between a pebble and a man. The old man looked at him somewhat sternly. Your aunt's been trying to explain the necessity for keeping yourself under control for several months now, and you've been fighting her every step of the way. Garion hung his head. I didn't know what she was getting at, he apologized. That's because you weren't listening. That's a great failing of yours, Garion. Garion flushed. What happened the first time you found out you could, well, do things? He asked quickly, wanting to change the subject. It was something silly, Wolf replied. It usually is, the first time. What was it? Wolf shrugged. I wanted to move a big rock. My arms and back weren't strong enough, but my mind was. After that, I didn't have any choice but to learn to live with it, because once you unlock it, it's unlocked forever. That's the point where your life changes, and you have to start learning to control yourself. It always gets back to that, doesn't it? Always, Wolf said. It's not as difficult as it sounds, really. Look at Mandaralin. He pointed at the knight who was riding with Dernick. The two of them were in a deep discussion. Now Mandaralin's a nice enough fellow, honest, sincere, toweringly noble. But let's be honest, his mind has never been violated by an original thought. Until now. He's learning to control fear, and learning to control it is forcing him to think. Probably for the first time in his whole life. It's painful for him, but he's doing it. If Banderon can learn to control fear with the limited brain of his, surely you can learn the same kind of control over the other emotions. After all, you're quite a bit brighter than he is. Silk, who had been scouting ahead, came riding back to join them. Belgarath, he said, there's something about a mile in front of us that I think you'd better take a look at. All right, Wolf replied. Think about what I've been saying, Garion. We'll talk more about it later. Then he and Silk moved off through the trees at a gallop. Garion pondered what the old man had told him. The one thing that bothered him the most was the crushing responsibility his unwanted talent placed upon him. The colt frisked along beside him, galloping off into the trees from time to time, and then rushing back, his little hooves pattering on the damp ground. Frequently he would stop and stare at Garion, his eyes full of love and trust. "Oh, stop that," Garion told him. The colt scampered away again. Princess Sinedra moved her horse up until she was beside Garion. "What were you and Belgarath talking about?" she asked. Garion shrugged. "A lot of things." There was immediately a hard little tightening around her eyes. In the months they had known each other, Garion had learned to catch those minute danger signals. Something warned him that the princess was spoiling for an argument. With an insight that surprised him, he reasoned out the source of her unspoken belligerence. What had happened in the cave had shaken her badly, and Sinedra did not like to be shaken. To make matters even worse, the princess had made a few coaxing overtures to the colt, obviously wanting to turn the little animal into her personal pet. The colt, however, ignored her completely, fixing all his attention on Garion, even to the point of ignoring his own mother unless he was hungry. Sinedra disliked being ignored even more than she disliked being shaken. Glumly, Garion realized how small were his chances of avoiding a squabble with her. "I certainly wouldn't want to pry into a private conversation," she said tartly. "It wasn't private. We were talking about sorcery and how to keep accidents from happening. I don't want to make any more mistakes." She turned that over in her mind, looking for something offensive in it. Her mild answer seemed to irritate her all the more. "I don't believe in sorcery," she said flatly. In light of all that had recently happened, her declaration was patently absurd, and she seemed to realize that as soon as she said it. Her eyes hardened even more. Garion sighed. "All right," he said with resignation. "Was there something in particular you wanted to fight about, or did you just want to start yowling and sort of make it up as we go along?" "Yowling?" Her voice went up several octaves. "Yowling?" "Screeching, perhaps," he suggested as insultingly as possible. As long as the fight was inevitable anyway, he determined to get in a few digs at her before her voice rose to the point where she could no longer hear him. "Screeching!" she screeched. The fight lasted for about a quarter of an hour before Beric and Aunt Paul moved forward to separate them. On the whole, it was not very satisfactory. Garion was a bit too preoccupied to put his heart into the insults he flung at the tiny girl, and Sinedra's irritation robbed her retorts of their usual fine edge. Toward the end, the whole thing had degenerated into a tedious repetition of spoiled brat and stupid peasant, echoing endlessly back from the surrounding mountains. Mr. Wolf and Silk rode back to join them. "What was all the yelling?" Wolf asked. "The children were playing," Aunt Paul replied with a withering look at Garion. "Where's Hedar?" Silk asked.
"Right behind us,"
Beric said. He turned to look back towards the pack horses, but the tall Algar was nowhere to be seen. Beric frowned.
"He was just there. Maybe he stopped for a moment to rest his horse or something."
"Without saying anything," Silk objected. "That's not like him, and it's not like him to leave the pack horses unattended." "He must have had some good reason," Beric said.
"I'll go back and look for him,"
Beric offered. "No," Mr. Wolf told him. "Wait a few minutes. Let's not get scattered all over the mountains. If anybody goes back, we'll all go back." They waited. The wind stirred the branches of the pines around them, making a mournful sighing sound. After several moments, Aunt Paul let out her breath almost explosively. "He's coming!" There was a steely note in her voice. He's been entertaining himself. From far back up the trail, Hedar appeared in his black leather clothing, riding easily at a loping canter with his long scalp lock flowing in the wind. He was leading two saddled horses, but riderless horses. As he drew nearer, they could hear him whistling rather tunelessly to himself.
What have you been doing? Beric demanded.
There were a couple of Murgos following us, Hedar replied, as if that explained everything.
You might have asked me to go along, Beric said, sounding a little injured.
Hedar shrugged. There were only two. They were riding Algar horses, so I took it rather personally. It seems that you always find some reason to take it personally where Murgos are concerned, Aunt Paul said crisply. It does seem to work out that way, doesn't it? Didn't it occur to you to let us know where you were going? She asked. There were only two, Hedar said again. I didn't expect to be gone for very long. She drew in a deep breath, her eyes flashing dangerously. Let it go, Paul, Mr. Wolf told her. But you're not going to change him, so why excite yourself about it? Besides, it's just as well to discourage pursuit. The old man turned to Hedar, ignoring the dangerous look Aunt Paul leveled at him. Were the Murgos some of those who were with Brill? He asked. Hedar shook his head. No, Brill's Murgos were from the south, and they were riding Murgo horses. These two were northern Murgos. Is there a visible difference? Manderolin asked curiously. The armor is slightly different, and the southerners have flatter faces, and they're not quite so tall. Where did they get the Algar horses? Garen asked. They're herd raiders, Hedar answered bleakly. Algar horses are valuable in Fall Murgos, and certain Murgos make a practice of creeping down into Algaria on horse-stealing expeditions. We try to discourage that as much as possible. These horses aren't in very good shape, Dernick observed, looking at the two weary-looking animals Hedar was leading. They've been ridden hard, and there are whip cuts on them. Hedar nodded grimly. That's another reason to hate Murgos.
Did you bury them?
Beric asked. No, I left them where any other Murgos who might be following could find them. I thought it might help to educate any who came along later. There are some signs that others have been through here, too, Silk said. I found the tracks of a dozen or so up ahead. It was to be expected, I suppose, Mr. Wolf commented, scratching at his beard. Two Chicks got his Grolms out in force, and Tar Urgas is probably having the region patrolled. I'm sure that they'd like to stop us if they could. I think we should move on down into the Vale as fast as possible. Once we're there, we won't be bothered anymore. Won't they follow us into the Vale? Dernick asked, looking around nervously. No, Murgos won't go into the Vale, not for any reason. Alder's spirit is there, and the Murgos are desperately afraid of him. How many days to the Vale? Silk asked. 4 or 5 if we ride hard, Wolf replied. We'd better get started then.